Motivational sayings implore us to always keep moving forward. Walt Disney once said we keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things because curiosity is what keeps us pressing on. Confucius reminded us that it does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop. And Eleanor Roosevelt believed that with each new day comes new strength and new thoughts. Even that cat that somehow appeared in every one of your childhood math class posters begged you to just hang in there. You've got this. All of that is true, except on the final day of your life. Because no matter how hard we push forward, the finish line is the same for all of us. Along with taxes, death is the only certainty we get. It's the end of our story, the last steps of the lifelong race we've been running. And maybe that's something to celebrate. After all, death gives life meaning. It's at the heart of some of humanity's greatest stories: Harry Potter, Romeo and Juliet, and Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, clung to his why to hold on to his humanity inside the Nazi killing centers. Rather than dwell on the death his captors intended for him, he chose life, writing, "Everything can be taken away from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms: to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Thousands of years earlier, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest surviving story, wrestled with the same question. When King Gilgamesh loses his closest friend Enkidu, he's shattered by grief and sets out on a quest for immortality. He seeks out a man who survived the Great Flood, hoping to learn the secret to eternal life. The answer he receives seems simple. Gilgamesh must stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. But he fails immediately. The flood's survivor's wife takes pity on him and sends him after a magical plant that can grant eternal life, only for a serpent to steal it while Gilgamesh sleeps. Twice defeated, the king returns home, realizing that immortality isn't found in escaping death, but in how one lives, in the legacy one leaves behind. But what if true immortality really were possible? Would the author of Gilgamesh be proven wrong for saying, if it is life the gods retain in their keeping, it is not human life, for human life depends on time and the possibility of death? Historian Yuval Noah Harari believes we're on the verge of testing that idea. He writes that 21st century humans are likely to make a serious bid for immortality. Death is a crime against humanity, and we ought to wage total war against it. If death truly is just annihilation, a quiet nothingness, then maybe fighting it makes sense. If there's no afterlife, then why not extend this one as long as possible? In Harari's view, death isn't divine punishment. It's a technical problem, a system failure. He explains that humans don't die because of a figure in a black cloak taps them on the shoulder. They die because of technical glitches: a heart that stops pumping blood, arteries that clog, cells that mutate. To him, death isn't mystery, it's mechanics. And for modern medicine, that makes it a challenge, one more problem to solve. But what if annihilation isn't what waits for us on the other side? What if death is part of a greater design, some cosmic plan? That question haunted even the greatest minds of the ancient world. Take Socrates, condemned to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. Though he rejected the charges, he faced his fate calmly, raising a cup of hemlock to his lips. Socrates believed the body and soul were separate. Death would only free his soul to keep searching for truth, for virtue, for whatever came next. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon supernatural occurrences related to the other side. Episode number 1, A Human History of the Afterlife. Obviously, I don't have the answers to what happens after we die. But as a historian, I can explore what others have believed and how ideas of heaven and hell have changed over time. Let's start with something simple. The Lion King. According to Simba's father, it's all part of the circle of life. When lions die, their bodies feed the grass, which in turn feeds the antelope, which then goes on to feed the lions again. The cycle continues: life, death, and renewal. Science for the most part agrees on those mechanics, if not the meaning. 98% of scientists accept evolution as fact. While some still see a divine hand guiding the process, most agree that humans and our long-lost cousins began as single-celled organisms that eventually evolved into apes. Among those cousins were the Neanderthals, creatures who for a long time were dismissed as little more than beasts. They had sloped foreheads, heavy brows, and could bend their knees so deeply they might have been able to eat an apple with their toes. Yet even these so-called savages buried their dead. 100,000 years ago, Neanderthals laid their loved ones to rest in shallow graves, sometimes with headrests or small offerings. Our own ancestors, Homo sapiens, did the same, tucking the dead into fetal positions near cave mouths, surrounding them with animal bones, carved stone, and tools. Maybe those tools were meant for the journey ahead. We can't know what these early humans believed, but their care, the deliberate way they arranged and adorned their dead, suggests something powerful: a recognition of mortality, and perhaps a faint hope that death wasn't the end. As time went on, these instincts evolved into rituals. Long before Jesus, Confucius, or Abraham, humans gathered in temples seeking to make sense of the unseen. And around 10,000 years ago, during the Neolithic Revolution, spiritual practice became more formal. At Catalhayuk, one of the world's oldest cities, people buried their loved ones beneath their homes. Bodies were painted, sometimes in colors matching the house itself, and occasionally they were dug up, repainted, and reburied, as if the living and the dead still shared the same space. Death wasn't an absence yet, it was a presence, woven into the rhythm of daily life. As civilizations expanded, so did the questions. What happens when we die? Do we linger? Do we travel? Are we judged? Do we return? For the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, the people of Gilgamesh, the answers were grim. The afterlife was Kur, a dusty shadowland where the dead existed as pale echoes of their former selves. It wasn't heaven or hell, just a gray continuation, life, but dimmed. To die was simply to go to one's fate. Your body stayed behind, your spirit went below. Death wasn't an end, but a change, a transformation from one kind of existence to another. Meanwhile, along the Nile, ancient Egypt imagined something very different. Their afterlife wasn't bleak, it was beautiful. A paradise called the Field of Reeds, a mirror of the Nile's fertile abundance. In Egypt's stories, the gods shaped humans from clay, battled chaos on their behalf, and even walked among them. Life was just one chapter in a far longer book, a prelude to eternity. If you lived justly and passed the gods' judgment, you'd be rewarded with a second life. one more perfect than the first. According to Egyptian mythology, the moment of death wasn't an ending, it was a beginning of a perilous journey through the underworld, the Duat. This was no peaceful passage. The Duat was a shadowy realm of gates, rivers, serpents, and divine judges. To make it through, a soul needed more than faith. It needed knowledge, passwords, spells, the sacred names of the gods. These weren't left to memory, they were written down in the Book of the Dead, a collection of magical texts often buried with the deceased, like an ancient cheat sheet for the soul's survival. By the time of Egypt's New Kingdom, the afterlife was no longer reserved for kings and queens. Ordinary people, farmers, artisans, and scribes could also hope to reach eternity, provided they lived justly and were properly prepared. Eventually, every soul would stand in the hall of Mahat, where the heart was weighed against a single feather, the symbol of truth and cosmic balance. If the heart was heavy with sin, it would be devoured by Amit, the fearsome chimera with the head of a crocodile, the front of a lion, and the back of a hippopotamus. But if the heart was light, pure, the soul would be welcome into the field of reeds, a sunlit paradise of clear waters and endless harvests. A heavenly afterlife, yes, but also a reflection of Egypt itself, its fertile valleys, its steady rhythm of life along the Nile. And that's something worth remembering. Across human history, visions of heaven and hell almost always mirror the landscapes people knew best. For the Egyptians, the path to eternity required preparation. Pharaohs didn't just build tombs, they built launch pads for eternity. To die properly, one had to die prepared. Their tombs were stocked with food, jewels, weapons, and golden thrones, everything a ruler might need for the journey ahead. Sacred texts lined the wall, curses guarded the doors. Loyal servants, bodyguards, and even beloved pets were sacrificed so that they could serve their master forever. Aligned with the stars, filled with secret chambers and spiritual passageways, each pyramid was a literal stairway to the heavens. And carved into those walls, the pharaoh's name. Because to be forgotten was to die a second death. Of course, not everyone was granted such a spectacular gravestone. While the theology of the afterlife was, in theory, open to all, in practice it was a privilege of power. Most Egyptians, the farmers, builders, and brewers, were laid to rest in modest graves at the desert's edge. They were buried with simple offerings, a loaf of bread, a pot of beer, humble gifts, but vital ones meant to nourish the soul on its journey. In Egyptian belief, there was no hellfire, no eternal torment. The punishment for failing the trials of the afterlife were far simpler and far more terrifying. It was annihilation, being forgotten by the living, rejected by the gods, erased from the eternal record. To the Egyptians, that was the truest death, the unmaking of your entire being. That's why they built so carefully, carved so deeply, and wrote so endlessly, not just to comfort the living, but to arm the dead, to make sure that, in some form or another, they would endure. A history of our understanding of the afterlife doesn't follow a simple chronological path. While the Sumerians and Egyptians were building their empires, other civilizations were developing far from the cradle, each asking the same haunting question: what happens next? In the Yellow River Valley of ancient China, ancestor worship took root. Here, among the swirling yellow silt, the dead were ever present, always watching. If properly honored, they could protect the living. But if neglected for too long, they might grow restless or angry. Over time, Chinese civilization refined its view of the soul. One portion of the spirit was believed to descend into the 10 courts of hell, where it would face 10 judges, each capable of assigning temporary punishments, like being boiled in oil, crushed by boulders, even sawed in half. But these punishments weren't eternal. Once the soul had paid its penance, it could pass through the underworld to await reincarnation, or in rare cases, gain entry to the pure land of the West. For the living, that journey didn't end at the grave. Families burned paper offerings, buckets, animals, money, all meant to ensure their loved ones' comfort along the way. Across the world in the Indus Valley, early burial practices also included items the dead might need for their next life. And thousands of miles away, the ancient Maya of Central America took this even further. They buried their dead beneath the floors of their homes, regularly bringing out their ancestors' bones for cleaning and care. Historian Susan Gillespie explains that by continually curating the bones of deceased family members within their own domestic space, the surviving members of the household may have strengthened their rights to material property believed to have been acquired by these ancestors. For the Maya, much like the forebearers of Hinduism in the Indus Valley, death wasn't an ending, but a transition. The soul was moving towards reincarnation. Their homes became places not of death, but of regeneration. Throughout history, humans across continents came to the same conclusion, independently. They buried their dead with care and intention, often with artifacts meaningful to the person or useful for whatever was believed to come next. Rather than accepting annihilation, ancient civilizations envisioned reincarnation, punishment, or eternal reward. The details differed, but the impulse was universal. For the Arctic Inuit, hell was freezing cold. For followers of Zoroastrianism, it meant eating only foul food. For the Babylonians, the damned were condemned to chew on dust. In the far north, the giant corpse eagle ruled over Heilhem. In Mesoamerica, Makanda Kuli, the skeletal god of death, watched over the underworld of Mictlan, his necklace made of human eyeballs. Different names, different fears, but the same yearning for meaning beyond the grave. Each of these cultures believed something happened after our time was up, proving that these questions are profoundly human. It wasn't religion that created the afterlife. It was the afterlife that helped create religion. And remarkably, that belief still holds. Even as religion declines in much of the modern world, belief in something beyond death remains stubbornly high. Writer Graham Lawton from New Scientist points out that rather than articulating concepts such as heaven and hell, these self-professed non-believers talk in vague terms about there being something. This lack of theological correctness has led psychologists to see afterlife beliefs as largely intuitive rather than learned. In other words, we don't need to be taught to wonder what happens when we die. We just do. It's one thing to imagine a vague something after death, a spiritual journey, a transformation, a return to the earth. It's another to construct an entire moral universe that judges our every action. As civilizations grew more stratified, with kings, laws, and hierarchies claiming divine authority, the afterlife began to mirror those same structures. In other words, it evolved. Death, once the great equalizer, was no longer just a passage or a transition. It became a trial. By the last millennium, before the modern age, that trial had taken shape. Some souls were rewarded, others were punished. This is the moment in history when hell, not just as a place, but a moral destination, truly begins to form. But without any first-hand reports from the devil's domain, how can humanity have come to such a shared image of hell? Sure, accepting a church's doctrine can give you a clear vision, but can we collectively agree on the concept of hell without invoking a higher power? That's where the philosophers step in. And though it might not always look like it, the philosopher's job is to reason out truth. In the 4th century BCE, Plato took up the challenge. In his dialogue, Phaedo, he describes the soul's journey after death as a process of purification. Those who live justly, he wrote, would ascend to a better place. The unjust would be dragged into torment beneath the earth. To separate the good from the bad, Plato imagined a system of moral accounting. Some souls cleansed and allowed to return, others left to harsher fates. And don't underestimate the influence of this idea. The 20th century philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once said that the entire European philosophical tradition consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. The Greeks called their underworld Tartarus, a shadowy realm beneath even Hades, where the wicked suffered poetic justice. The liar had his tongue ripped out. The traitor carried his betrayal forever. For Plato, this wasn't divine sadism. It was the restoration of cosmic balance, punishment not for cruelty's sake, but for moral order. But the idea of fire as punishment? Well, that comes later. One of the earliest known visions of fiery judgment appears in Zoroastrianism, one of the world's first monotheistic religions. Originating in ancient Persia around 1500 to 1000 BCE, it taught that every soul must cross the Chinvat bridge after death. If judged virtuous, the bridge widened and led to paradise. If not, it narrowed, and the soul plunged into a pit of smoke, fire, and decay. That vision spread. Jewish apocalyptic texts, especially those written during the Second Temple period, introduced Gehenna, a cursed valley outside Jerusalem once used for child sacrifice. Over time, it became a symbol of spiritual punishment. By the time of Jesus, Gehenna meant something new, a fiery pit where the unrighteous would be cast. It's in this fusion, Persian dualism, Greek philosophy, and Jewish theology, that heaven and hell emerge as moral opposites, eternal destinations of reward and punishment. That might feel inevitable now, but in early Judaism there was no such idea. Historian Bart Ehrman notes that the ancient Israelites did not subscribe to the view of the immortality of the soul. The body and the soul were one, and when one died, so did the other. No reward, no punishment, just silence. The dead descended to Sheol, a shadowy, ill-defined place. Not quite a location, not quite a fate. Ehrman points out that while Sheol appears more than 60 times in the Hebrew Bible, critical scholars are unanimous in thinking that in no case does Sheol mean hell in the sense people mean today. By this, he means that there was no fire, no torment, and perhaps most unsettling of all, no justice. But that view didn't last. As Judaism developed, particularly during the Second Temple period, it absorbed ideas from its neighbors. Zoroastrianism introduced cosmic dualism, heaven and hell, good and evil. Greek philosophy offered moral sorting after death. And Jewish apocalyptic writings, the ones that didn't make it into the Bible, began to weave those ideas together. Gehenna became more than a valley. It became a metaphor for judgment. So by the time Christianity appeared in the 1st century CE, the ground was already shifting. The question was no longer if something happened after death, but what. And at the center of that transformation stands Jesus of Nazareth. He is the theological pivot point, revered as the Son of God in Christianity, as a prophet in Islam, and as a reformer or heretic in Judaism. A Galilean Jew, born in Roman-occupied Judea around the turn of the 1st century, his teachings were steeped in Jewish tradition, but framed in revolutionary moral terms. At the time, Jewish belief about the afterlife wasn't uniform. The Sadducees still held to the old ways. Death was final, no resurrection, no judgment. But the Pharisees believed differently, seeing resurrection, divine justice, and reward or punishment after death. Jesus entered that debate and tipped the scale. In his parables, he spoke vividly of heaven and hell, but not as physical landscapes of torture. His focus was moral consequence. The kingdom of heaven, he said, was not just a distant paradise, but something breaking into the world, for the pure-hearted, the merciful, and the just. Hell, meanwhile, appeared most often in his use of Gehenna, that cursed valley now symbolizing divine reckoning. Jesus warned that hypocrites and the unrepentant risked being cast into Gehenna, where there would be weeping and gnashing of teeth. But often the punishment was destruction, not eternal torment, obliteration, not endless fire. Still, it was Jesus who reframed death as judgment, where moral life determined eternal fate. And after his death, his followers, particularly those influenced by Greek philosophy, made those ideas more literal, more vivid, and ultimately eternal. But Jesus remains a figure of both continuity and contrast across faiths. In Islam, Isa, Jesus, is revered as one of the greatest prophets. The Quran calls him the Messiah, born of a virgin, destined to return at the end of days. In Islamic teaching, he was not crucified but taken up by God, awaiting his return to defeat the false Messiah and preside over the final judgment. Islam teaches that souls are then divided, the righteous to Jannah, paradise, the wicked to Jahannam, the fires of hell. Yet even here, some find mercy. Certain souls, after serving their time, may eventually enter paradise. Across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the image of the afterlife hardens, shaped by theology, empire, and philosophy. And Jesus stands at the center of that evolution, the turning point where annihilation becomes judgment, and where death becomes the beginning of eternity. Yet Ehrman suggests that Jesus' own vision was much more urgent and much more immediate. The historian writes that Jesus believed a day of judgment was coming soon, that the first shall be last and the last first, the exalted shall be humbled and the humble exalted. As Jesus told his disciples, some of those standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come in power. And again in the Gospel of Mark, truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away before all these things take place. But the promised apocalypse never came. Jesus' suffering and death did, but the day of divine reckoning, when God would destroy evil and raise the dead, hasn't. It fell to his follower Paul to reinterpret that promise. In his letters, Paul urged believers to live in preparation for judgment. The wicked would face wrath and anger, while the righteous would inherit glory, honor, and peace. Because Christianity rejected reincarnation, those fates, reward or punishment, became eternal. That idea shaped centuries of belief and anxiety, and it's what inspired Pascal's wager, a thought experiment by the 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal, who argued that any rational person should live as if God exists. If God doesn't exist, you lose little, maybe some time, money, or football games on a Sunday. But if God does, you gain infinite reward and avoid infinite punishment. And for many, that wager still defines the calculus of faith. But what if this stark choice between eternal reward and punishment isn't the only way to understand death? As powerful as the image of a fiery hell has become in Western imagination, it's worth stepping outside that framework. Because not every culture envisions the afterlife as a cosmic courtroom. Not every soul is weighed on a scale, nor punished for eternity. In fact, for much of the ancient world, particularly in the East, death was not a final judgment at all. It was a cycle. Hinduism, one of the world's oldest surviving religions, takes an entirely different view. Rather than envisioning a single afterlife, it teaches samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Souls are bound by karma, the accumulated result of one's actions in previous lives. A good life leads to a better rebirth. A corrupt life leads to suffering in the next. The ultimate goal is not paradise, but moksha, liberation from the cycle entirely. But that doesn't mean punishment is absent. Hindu cosmology describes numerous hellish realms, collectively called niraksha, where souls may temporarily suffer the consequences of their actions. These realms, ruled by the god Yama, vary in their torments. Rivers of boiling pus, forests of thorns, lakes of fire, not unlike Dante's Inferno, which came centuries later. But unlike in Christianity or Islam, these hells are not eternal. Once the karmic debt is paid, the soul moves on. Buddhism, emerging from the same cultural and geographic soil, reworks these concepts. In Buddhist cosmology, the hell realms remain, but like all things according to their teachings, are impermanent. To them, suffering is part of life, and rebirth into a hell realm is just one possible consequence of negative karma. The goal again is not heaven, but nirvana, the cessation of desire and ultimately the end of the cycle of suffering. These Eastern frameworks offer something strikingly different from their Western counterparts, a system that is moral but not final. The soul may be judged, but it's not doomed forever. Suffering may come, but it is not necessarily punishment. It may simply be the natural consequence of attachment, illusion, or imbalance. And if that sounds more philosophical than theological, it's because in many Eastern traditions, the universe itself is the judge. There's no Satan, no divine courtroom, just cause and effect spread across infinite lifetimes. Yet within Buddhism, that cycle of rebirth isn't the end of the story. Because while the soul, or more accurately the stream of consciousness, is bound to samsara by karma, the ultimate goal isn't simply to be reborn into a better life. It's to escape the cycle altogether. Through years, even lifetimes of meditation, right action, and spiritual insight, a person may attain nirvana, the state of total liberation. When that moment of enlightenment comes, the individual awakens to the illusion of self, and the boundary between me and everything else dissolves. At that point, the soul, or what's left of it, can choose to remain out of compassion as a bodhisattva, helping others along the path. Or they can choose to let go entirely. No more suffering, no more becoming, only return to what some traditions call the one mind, or the unconditioned reality. It's a concept deliberately beyond description. Even the Buddha refused to define nirvana directly. He called it the blowing out, like a candle, not of life, but of illusion, of desire, of separation. Yet for all its abstractions, this final release has an oddly familiar echo, one that recurs across time, cultures, and even hospital rooms. because across millennia the story changes. From Sheol to Gehenna, from Samsara to Nirvana, yet the yearning remains the same, to know what lies beyond the veil. A feeling of detachment, a sense of peace, a floating sensation, and then a light. The white light. You've heard the stories, a tunnel, a warmth, a brightness that isn't blinding, but somehow comforting. A presence, sometimes described as a being, sometimes as pure love that seems to welcome the dying person. Some experience a life review. Others report meeting deceased relatives. And then, just as suddenly, they're back, revived on the operating table, jolted by a defibrillator, or shaken awake in a hospital bed. These experiences aren't rare. In fact, they've been recorded for centuries. Ancient Greek philosopher Plato tells a story in the Republic of a soldier named who was believed to have died in battle, only to awaken 12 days later on his funeral bed. Spoke of a journey through the afterlife, of souls ascending and descending, of judgment, and of a dazzling light that marked the border between worlds. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Bardo Thodol, better known in the West as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, offers a strikingly similar account. According to this tradition, the soul passes through several stages or bardos after death. In one of these, it encounters a brilliant light, the manifestation of ultimate reality. If the soul recognizes it and merges with it, liberation is achieved. But if it recoils, overwhelmed by fear or ego, the cycle of rebirth resumes. In this view, the white light is not a metaphor, it's truth itself. And in the modern era, medical science has taken a cautious but growing interest in what are now called near-death experiences, or NDEs. Beginning in earnest with psychiatrist Raymond Moody's 1975 book, Life After Life, researchers have cataloged thousands of accounts from people who have been clinically dead for seconds or minutes, only to return with detailed stories of what they saw. The common elements are remarkable: out-of-body sensations, peace, tunnels, light, and often the decision or command to return. Modern theories attempt to explain these visions biologically. Some neuroscientists suggest the white light may be a result of oxygen lost to the visual cortex, producing tunnel vision and visual hallucinations. Others point to the release of endorphins in moments of extreme stress. More recent studies suggest a surge of synchronized brain activity, a kind of last electrical gasp that could account for the vivid experiences. And yet, the reports continue, not just from adults, but from children, not only from Christians, but from Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus, even atheists. Some experiences align neatly with religious expectations. Others seem to transcend any particular faith. And a surprising number describe an encounter not with judgment or terror, but with something they struggle to put into words. A sense of peace, a return, a merging. It's this moment, the threshold, that fascinates. Because whether seen through the lens of Buddhism's return to the one, or science exploration of consciousness, or a survivor's own quiet story, the experience of dying seems to hold something universal. Because if death is the great mystery, then maybe, just maybe, the instant of dying is when that mystery lifts, even if only for a second. And from that second, entire visions of the afterlife can grow and evolve over time. When hope for paradise isn't enough to make you choose a moral life, the threat of hell steps in. Deterrence depends on two things: the severity of punishment, and the certainty of being caught. An all-seeing deity ensures the latter, and Dante's Inferno, with its clawed demons, rivers of blood, and storm-racked sinners, more than delivers the former. But hell hasn't always looked like this. In the earliest days of Christianity, hell was still a work in progress, a collage of older ideas. It borrowed from Jewish Sheol, Greek Hades, and the fiery pits of Zoroastrianism. Jesus himself spoke more about Gehenna, that cursed valley outside Jerusalem associated with decay and death, than about any lake of fire. It was a warning, not yet a place. But as the church expanded, hell became more structured and more theatrical. Early Christian thinkers like Origen of Alexandria, writing in the 3rd century CE, imagined hell not as an eternal torture chamber, but as a place of purification, where souls might suffer, yes, but only until they were made whole again. Even the devil, Origen believed, could one day be saved through God's mercy. That mercy didn't last long. By the time of St. Augustine, a century later, hell had hardened into permanence. Influenced by both Plato and Paul, Augustine taught that a soul's destination, heaven or hell, was fixed forever. No second chances, no reincarnation, no escape. And since the soul was immortal, so too was its suffering. That view became official doctrine for much of Western Christianity. This version of hell wasn't just a place for the wicked. It was a cornerstone of divine justice, proof of God's goodness through the punishment of evil. To deny hell was to deny moral order itself. As centuries passed, hell moved from abstraction to architecture. In 1308, Dante Alighieri offered a guided tour in his Inferno, carving the underworld into 9 circles of sin, each more grotesque than the last. There were demons with pitchforks, yes, but also frozen lakes, burning sands, and endless storms. The sins weren't cosmic, they were human. Pride, greed, lust. Dante's hell was more than poetry. It was a moral map, a place where punishment fit the crime. Gluttons who once lived in excess were buried in filth. Fortune-tellers who claimed to see the future were forced to walk backward, forever blind to what lay ahead. And Dante's vision stuck. His Inferno, more than any scripture, gave hell its lasting imagery. His Satan wasn't a ruler, but a prisoner, frozen at the bottom, wings beating uselessly, chewing endlessly on Judas. Not a rebel king, a ruined angel. In the centuries that followed, preachers took up Dante's torch, none more effectively than Jonathan Edwards, the 18th century revivalist. His sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, didn't dwell on flames. It dwelled on fear. God holds you over the pit of hell, Edwards thundered, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire. For Edwards, hell wasn't just real, it was deserved. Not for murder or theft, but for pride, laziness, distraction, and spiritual indifference. His words helped ignite the First Great Awakening, a wave of emotional, personal Christianity fueled by the sheer terror of damnation. But as the Enlightenment dawned, reason began to share the stage with revelation. Thinkers started to ask whether eternal punishment was compatible with divine justice. Centuries later, Jean-Paul Sartre gave hell a modern face. Hell is other people, he wrote. Not flames or demons, just endless self-consciousness. In his play, No Exit, hell is a small room where 3 souls torture each other simply by being seen. The point was philosophical. The worst suffering isn't inflicted from without, but from within. Theologian David Bentley Hart goes further. To him, the idea of eternal hell isn't just cruel, it's absurd. The concept of eternal hell, he writes, makes God into a moral monster. How could a finite life, even one steeped in sin, deserve infinite punishment? Modern psychology has joined the conversation. Studies show that belief in a punitive afterlife often correlates with anxiety, guilt, and depression. Belief in a loving, forgiving deity, meanwhile, tends to foster peace and moral confidence. And yet hell doesn't disappear. It continues to evolve. It might seem strange to start a reinterpretation of the afterlife with a sitcom, but The Good Place, starring Ted Danson as a self-doubting minion of the devil, did more to get people thinking about heaven and hell than most sermons in the last decade. In 2019, I was watching an episode called The Book of Dougs. If you've never seen the now concluded show, Danson plays a demon running an experiment on 4 humans he falsely tells are in heaven. Over time, he grows close to them, a kind of surrogate family, and that bond makes him question the very system he's meant to enforce. After seasons of moral philosophy disguised as comedy, the group finally figures it out. The system itself is broken. Heaven and hell's point scale no longer works. Danson's character explains to the judge, "Life now is so complicated, it's impossible for anyone to be good enough for the good place. These days, just buying a tomato at a grocery store means that you are unwittingly supporting toxic pesticides, exploiting labor, contributing to global warming. Humans think that they are making one choice, but they're actually making dozens of choices that they don't even realize that they're making." That sense of moral confusion isn't new. Even in early Christianity, debates raged over whether faith or works secured salvation. Augustine and Pelagius argued bitterly. Was it enough to believe, or did you have to behave? Today, algorithms track our clicks. In the Middle Ages, it was confessionals that counted our sins. Even in Jesus' own time, it wasn't always clear which choices could lead to damnation. The 10 Commandments begin with, "There is only one God." But what about modern idols, politicians, celebrities, fictional heroes? Does worshiping them count? Murder, of course, is universally condemned. But what about killing in defense of a child? Jesus often spoke of justice with the sharp edge of a sword, but ultimately he reduced his moral code to 2 guideposts. Love God, love your neighbor. Living a pure life mattered, yet Jesus also surrounded himself with outcasts, including prostitutes and tax collectors. And while he condemned greed and usury, many modern believers don't lose sleep over interest rates on their credit cards. Without a clear scoreboard, followers are left to wonder whether their faults or simple ignorance might tip the scale towards eternal punishment. The Catholic Church eventually offered 2 get-out-of-hell options. First, confession and repentance. And if that proved to be too hard, there was always the backup plan: indulgences, holy relics that let sinners buy their way into heaven. Although Jesus preached that the poor would inherit the earth, his church on earth didn't just offer salvation, it sold it. Wealthy nobles could purchase heavenly assurance, while the poor were left to pray harder. Indulgences blurred the line between redemption and racketeering. It was this practice that pushed Martin Luther over the edge. As a young man, Luther nearly died when lightning struck near him, a moment that set him on a spiritual path. When he later challenged indulgences, the Pope dismissed him as some drunken German who will amend his ways when he sobers up. He didn't. Instead, Luther's protest ignited centuries of religious war. How many points, one wonders, did the church earn for the 6.5 million deaths that followed in the wake of these proclamations? Eventually, Catholics and Protestants learned to coexist. The Catholic Church kept indulgences, but banned their sale. Protestants, for their part, scrapped the point system altogether, insisting that salvation depended not on good deeds, but on unwavering faith in God. In the end, whether you're bargaining with a priest, gaming a cosmic point system, or hoping the last tomato you purchased hasn't eternally doomed you, the same question remains. What does it mean to be good, and who gets to decide? That question has echoed across millennia. Ancient Persians imagined a judgment bridge. The Greeks envisioned a cosmic balance. Christians created fire and brimstone. The Vikings promised a warrior's reward. Buddhists offered escape through enlightenment. Some cultures said there was no hell at all, just fading into the earth or returning to the clan of ancestors. Others feared fire, ice, shadow, or worse, judgment from the self. In all of these visions, hell serves a purpose. It is a warning, a motivator, a mirror. It reflects our fears of failure, our longing for justice, and our discomfort with the idea that wrongdoers might simply get away with it. But perhaps more than that, hell is a product of our need for moral architecture, the belief that there is some order to this chaotic world and some consequence beyond it. The problem, of course, is that the architecture shifts. One generation's sin becomes another's virtue. The early church condemned usury. Today, interest rates fuel the global economy. Jesus dined with sex workers and tax collectors, yet centuries later, their very identities became symbols of damnation. Some were born into castes or classes that damned them by default. Others found salvation just a coin or a confession away. Hell has been political, cultural, and deeply personal. It has justified wars and revolutions, controlled populations, driven acts of heroism and horror. And it has changed shape along the way. From the shadowlands of Sheol to Dante's frozen pit to Ted Danson in a bow tie, trying to fix a broken cosmic algorithm. Today, belief in hell is declining, particularly in the West, but the idea lives on. Maybe not as a lake of fire, but as regret, shame, alienation. Sartre once wrote that hell is other people, but just as often, hell is ourselves. The life unlived, the choices we can't undo, the person we might have become. As one modern philosopher put it, maybe hell is when, on the last day of your life, the person you are meets the person you could have been. So perhaps hell isn't a place we go. Perhaps it's a place we carry, or a path we choose. Not every culture needed fire to imagine punishment. Sometimes emptiness was enough. And yet still we hope. We hope that we will be judged fairly. We hope that the ones we love are safe. We hope, even if quietly, that we ourselves might find peace when the time comes. What happens after we die? We may never know, but we know this. It is the stick for those of us who refuse to be led around by a carrot, and what we believe about the afterlife shapes how we live. And that may be hell's greatest power of all. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or find us on Bluesky beneath the handle EmpiresPod. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.